Here we go.
There we go.
Cool. Good afternoon, Andrew.
Good afternoon. It's good to see you.
It's good to see you too, and your art as always. Thank you for helping me with
Yours as
my
well.
in the background.
Absolutely.
Um, uh,
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining. It's been a tough week, and we're not sure who all is going to join us here for this dialogue, but wanted to hold space for our colleagues and comrades and co-conspirators and friends, just to touch base and be in community a bit because it's been such a tough week with the inauguration falling on a particularly meaningful day, certainly for Black folks and people of color, but particularly Black folks in this country. And then the stream of executive orders that have come since inauguration, plus the anticipation and the anxiety and the stress that folks are holding around what's to come this year, because there is some clarity around what the current administration put out there during the campaign in terms of their plans, but also kind of the corollary or the flip side, the uncertainty of exactly how it's going to unfold. We've gotten some clues this week in terms of birthright citizenship, DEI, legislation around trans folks. So we just want to hold space to be in community, to support one another, to ask any of our colleagues who might be here what they anticipate needing this year that Equity in the Center might be able to provide. So we'll come back to that in a moment. But as an individual, I think as a team at Equity in the Center, what we've been trying to ground in this week, as well as last week in anticipation of the changed administration, is not to panic. I think for some of us, it was a request to stop panicking and to be calm, to center, I'm including myself from moment to moment, to ground in our values, our certainty around those values, our belief that equity and justice can be attained in beloved community over time, and to stay committed to that work, to one another, and to the fight, because it will continue. So to be calm as much as possible, to remain connected, and also to adopt some individual as well as organizational practices to stay grounded in those values and our ancestors, in whatever particular meditative practice folks might have. So I will stop there and hand it over to you to talk a little bit about those practices. And I'll remind folks that we'll come back to talking about how Equity in the Center will hold space like this, more structured space also moving forward over the course of this year. But I'll toss it to you, Andrew.
Great. Thanks, Kay. Yeah, and I appreciate that opening, because I think staying calm is just hard. It's hard right now, given kind of everything that's going on. And, when I was thinking about our time together, definitely wanted to kind of share some things that we've found helpful within Equity in the Center, what we've heard from other people leading up to this week, and wanted to share a couple of things that might be helpful for you from a personal perspective, as an individual, and then some things that you, either as a leader or a colleague within an organizational context, can do to continue to do the work that's required moving forward, while also staying calm, healthy, collected as one can be in the given moment. And we often talk about how, work around race equity is not about lists, and it's not about kind of checking the boxes. But I do think, for me, at least in this particular context, actually having a list of things that I should be doing from a wellness standpoint, I think is actually helpful for me. So I just wanted to share some of those with you. And so the first thing from a personal or individual perspective that I think is really helpful is to continue, or start for some, to acknowledge and actually process the emotions that you're feeling at the moment. Allow yourself to feel whatever is coming up for you: anger, fear, sadness. In my case, often just disgust, whatever that might be, about the given moment, I think is really helpful, and do that without judgment, because what you're feeling is real, and often warranted. And I think parts of that, when you're feeling those emotions, everyone's got their own practice for what you do with those things, but journaling, meditation of some sort, is incredibly helpful. And obviously therapy is something that you've heard us talk about from an individual perspective before, to help process those feelings, I think are critical. Another thing that I think is helpful, which I heard this the other day, or read this the other day, or maybe it was this morning, but um, it was basically saying everyone's got to stay informed but not inundated. And so kind of setting healthy boundaries about, what information you're taking in. I mean, the news cycle right now is like 30 minutes long at the moment, or probably even less, and headlines are everywhere. So I think it's critically important that we as individuals stay informed, but we also have control as to if we're actually staying informed or if we're being inundated with information. The doom scrolling that I've been known to do doesn't actually help us. So figuring out a process that you can individually use to get the information that you need without spending hours a day scrolling, through the hours of mess that's out there on TikTok or Instagram or Facebook or whatever you use. And I think it's not healthy for you to do. It also actually makes you the least helpful when it matters most. And so figuring out the ways to get the proper information, without the doom scroll, I think is great. And so just limiting yourself to toxic environments as much as you can, toxic conversations with people that you actually don't need to have conversations with. And then of course, like I said, staying or limiting yourself to social, I think is important. So take those intentional breaks. Kay mentioned it before, kind of cultivating some, kind of wellness practices and staying calm. So, I mean, for me, prioritizing sleep as much as possible. It's the winter, it's cold for almost everybody. So get the rest that you need. Sleep in the winter is what we're here to do. So sleep when you can. Continue to eat well. Of course, for any kind of occasional vices, mine's ice cream. So I have been eating that nightly. But make sure that you're eating well. Make sure you try to exercise or get outside and walk, and get some fresh air to regulate your body, and your breathing. Those things are helpful for the body. And build some mindfulness practices if you haven't already, even if it's for 3 to 5 minutes a day. It can really help you regulate, and support and calming your mind. One thing that I've started to do in 2025 is when I wake up, not to look directly at my phone. I put my feet on the ground, and I actually turn on some music and some jazz, and I do not look at my phone for the first hour of the day, which has been helpful for me. We're all here to be in community with one another, and so from an individual perspective, find and continue to build community, as much as you can. Obviously, connecting with others who share your own values, your experiences that are similar, to yours, to challenges that you're experiencing. Connect with people as much as you can, because solidarity is a powerful tool in combating, what's happening in the world right now. But it also, I think, helps with, mitigating the feelings of like loneliness and isolation, and helplessness sometimes. So I think being in community is very helpful as well. Another thing that I think, we're going to need to do is I talked about kind of staying informed but not inundated, but we need to continue to educate ourselves when we can. So continuing to deepen our understanding of what's actually happening in our context, individually, within our families, within organizations, I think will be critical, so that we can continue to fight when the time is right. And then I think the last thing from a personal or individual standpoint is to continue to prioritize joy and creativity, So a part of your mindful practice, or practice in general, should be to carve out time for activities that bring you joy or allow you to express yourself in ways that you find meaningful, and don't let them take the joy that you have. The things that brought you joy pre inauguration can be the things that bring you joy after as well. So those moments of light and love are essential for sustaining the much needed hope that we're going to need to continue to do this work. And so I think those things I keep a little list in my room around those things, so I can try to do some of those things every single day. Sometimes I'm successful and sometimes I'm not, but I think creating a list for yourself would be incredibly useful in this moment. From an organizational perspective, I think there are some slight shifts to what you should be doing individually to an organizational perspective. But from the first one, from an individual perspective, I said, was a kind of acknowledging your emotions. And from an organizational perspective, I think it's helpful and critical that leaders within organizations, acknowledge the impact of of this particular moment. And this is for many unprecedented times, and leaders should name and validate what's happening to the best of their ability, and recognize how the political shifts that we're seeing might be affecting employees' mental health, their safety, and overall work. So I think even just acknowledging that what is happening is real, I think is critically important. Another thing that I know is useful for organizations even before this week, but will continue to be moving forward, is to create and foster kind of open communication and brave spaces. So creating opportunities for people to process what's happening by using hopefully outside facilitators who can hold that space. And I say that because the emotions and processing can be, right now particularly, can be raw and fraught. So you really want to bring in skilled facilitation when you're able to, when it's going to be a group setting. And many of you might even have affinity spaces or employee resource groups or ERGs, where people can have smaller conversations in spaces that they already feel comfortable in, to have those meaningful conversations and to build more community and build deeper relationships built on kind of authenticity and trust. But if facilitated group discussions or large group discussion isn't a norm within your organization, I think at the very least, managers can and should be doing individual check-ins with their direct reports to get a pulse as to where their teams are, and if there are themes and or needs of staff that are being unmet at this moment that your organization can actually meet. Make sure you're sharing those insights with decision makers within your organization to hopefully move towards meeting some of those unmet needs.
Andrew, do you want to share what we did this week? That might be.
Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah. So we, as a senior leadership team here at Equity in the Center, we made the decision to actually give folks Monday, Tuesday, and yesterday off, so that people could take the time that they needed to process and do whatever it is that they needed to do. Some folks I know were in community with others in their kind of local regions. Other people got off their socials and news and did whatever they needed to. But I think having time outside of the work context was incredibly helpful for everyone at Equity in the Center. And that was a decision that the senior leadership could make. And we tried to meet the needs of our colleagues.
Thank you. Hopefully it was helpful. We talked among ourselves, but we're closed to the public and wanted to make sure that folks just had some space to process what was happening. And so for some people, that's checking out completely. I know folks are sharing what's working for them in the comments. And for some of us, it was staying a little bit engaged, but not holding space formally for others, so that we ourselves could refill our cups or just begin to navigate the now as our colleague EIC Executive Vice President Nikki Jagpal coined. Like, I feel like it's a really great articulation of what we are all trying to figure out. And so holding space today is part of EIC's commitment to navigating the now and to supporting our stakeholders, our colleagues, our co-conspirators in doing the same. A big part of holding that space is figuring out what we will need as the year and the new administration unfolds. So one question we came in today with, and we invite you all to drop these things in the comments, is what do you anticipate needing? What type of support or space might be helpful to you? And maybe it's spaces similar to this, which is relatively unstructured, just a chance to connect and ground in community. But because we focus on supporting organizations and building a race equity culture, we were planning to provide some space for leaders and organizational teams to potentially pivot as well as to persist over the course of this year. So that might be thinking about affinity space, as Andrew was referencing, for those who hold a particular identity and are navigating the world or this country at this moment, as well as their particular role in an organization. And we know that Black folks, folks of color, folks who identify as queer, disabled folks disproportionately hold equity and justice work in organizations or DEI work within organizations. So we want to make sure that we're holding space for those of us persisting or working to persist over the course of this year, to get some tools and resources and to support one another. So coming this spring, we're going to launch a subscription which would allow leaders and organizations to have access to more regular space, to get some technical support, coaching, access to affinity space, as well as access to folks who can help them navigate any internal dynamics that they might be facing. And our goal is to make this space as accessible as possible. So there would be a balance of spaces like this, which come at no cost, and others that might come with a fee, which has been our practice to have a tiered pricing structure over time. But we are committed to holding more space like this regularly, where it's out here for everybody who might want to join. So it would be really helpful to us as we come up with a calendar of events and tools and resources to support folks over the course of this year, to hear from you, like, what are your questions, where are your pain points, and how might we support? One thing that I have found colleagues to be encouraged by, as we've talked in the last 90 days or so, is that in states like Florida and Texas and Iowa, where there has been legislation on the books against DEI for some time, there are some success stories of individuals in organizations who have been able to persist with the body of work that helps to minimize disparities internally as well as in their broader work, by shifting their language. I do want to name that in terms of the prohibition on DEI work within the federal government, that the administration did name that there will be an effort to, I guess, surface coded language that might cover equity and justice or DEI work, as it may continue over the course of this year. So I do want to name that that's a reality. And we do feel strongly that there is a way to persist in instituting organizational practices and principles that allow folks to thrive. Because at the end of the day, over the course of equity in the center's journey as an organization, and for many of us as individual practitioners and leaders of equity or DEI work, we've always said that centering the lived experiences of individuals who have been historically marginalized benefits not just the whole organization or the whole community, but society. So at the end of the day, our work has always been in support of all. And we have been encouraged to see some of our colleagues in states like Florida and Texas be able to persist, though the landscape is becoming increasingly challenging. So that's a point of hope that I've had to ground myself in as a race equity practitioner over the course of the past year, and certainly since the November election result. Andrew, I'll let you share any point of hope that you might have grounded yourself in these past months.
Yeah, I mean, I think the hope that I have is similar to what you shared. I know that folks remain committed to this work in shifting landscapes, and although the landscape seems to be shifting more quickly than it has in the past. We've always been dealing with a shifting landscape. And I also think what brings me hope is, talking to older generations, my elders who have seen and been through so much, remain committed to this work and kind of focused on uh, long-term outcomes, that they've been able to support me in grounding myself in kind of the here and now, and knowing that we've gotten through hard things before and we're going to get through hard things now. And so that talking to my elders is something that gives me hope.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And grounding in like ancestors, ancestral wisdom, I feel like is something that has come up in meetings of practitioners, I'd say over the course of the past month, when we ask folks, how are you doing? What are you doing? It's ancestral work, ancestral practice. So grounding in whatever it is that makes you you, and who are your people? Which is a question that when you come into some spaces, a question you'll be asked. So who are your people? How can you ground yourself in that legacy? And we're here in what's called the United States on indigenous land. I try to ground myself in the fact that this is still and will always be indigenous land, and the fact that my people, enslaved Africans and their descendants, built this joint for free. So this country belongs to me as much as it belongs to any other person who has their particular history on Turtle Island. So just trying to remind myself of that. We have some colleagues who are researching their ancestors, which has given them strength to persist in this moment. And as a Black woman, I do want to name that we, as folks who are always at the leading edge of movement, have the, I don't want to say privilege, but the obligation to ourselves, as Andrew was saying, in terms of wellness, to step back as we need to. So many of us are here and are going to continue to fight for the things we've been fighting for over the course of our careers. And we can step back and take care of ourselves, because if we don't, we won't be able to persist and to stay in the fight. And so I did want to name that, because we are always out there leading and helping. And this is a moment where I have been encouraged by the collective choice of Black women to name that they'll be actively stepping back this year. And I've also been encouraged by allies who have said, like, we're here for whatever is to come this year. And while the needs of Black women, the priorities of Black communities, their experiences, BIPOC folks, queer folks, disabled folks will be centered, we are not going to ask you to lead. And we understand the importance of that in this particular moment. One thing I did, go ahead.
Kay, I'll just say that as Black women are choosing to step back and rest and do all the things that you need to make sure that you're getting what you need. I think it's a time for Black men, particularly within this space. There are not many of us, but the people that are here, to really step up so that you're allowed to rest and others are allowed to rest. And I do think making sure that we're creating spaces for Black men to come together to do the necessary work that we need to do, to allow for that, I think is critical. So it's something that that I'm very interested in. So if there are Black men on this or see this, please reach out to me.
Thanks so much for that offer, Andrew. And deep gratitude to those of you sharing in the chat. We appreciate it. And we're glad that this space is a useful one, coming back after 2 days of reflection and rest and doing things that bring us joy as we think about what's ahead. We knew we wanted to be in community, so we're really grateful that you joined us today. I did want to address one comment in the chat around feedback or recommendations from lawyers regarding the executive orders, as well as upcoming whatever legislation is to come. I know HR 9495 has been on the tip of the tongues of every nonprofit leader I know for some time. So the executive orders, I feel like, will pivot in real time. And we are planning to offer some space for folks with legal expertise to provide nonprofit leaders and movement folks with some recommendations. And the advice that we got on this issue is don't panic. And again, stay grounded in our values and understand that the legislative cycle, in particular, executive orders are different, but the legislative cycle is long. Also, HR 9495 will remove potentially 501c3's tax exempt status, but organizations will, unless there are other measures and other legislation put in place, be able to continue to exist. Now, they would not be able to accept grants from foundations unless the policies and the practices of foundations change. But that was some helpful context that we got. Doesn't change the broader landscape, but it did help us as a team be able to prioritize next steps we might explore in the next few months, as opposed to being overwhelmed by the magnitude of being shut down. But we all do also understand that in the grand scheme of things, that is the larger goal. But in the moment, we're just trying to lean on good advice, as the person in the comments was asking, and to move forward as intentionally as we can. We also hope to be able to provide some space for folks to hear from, folks with legal expertise, but there are also security concerns that we'd like to provide some space for people to get some good advice and recommendations on, because accessing that expertise can be costly. So those are things we're thinking about offering in spaces like this, as well as potentially as part of the subscription and other resources we might offer. Cool. It looks like some folks are taking you up on your offer, Andrew.
I saw that. My man Myron's here. Appreciate you joining, Myron.
Awesome. Thanks. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to share, Andrew. We all are just glad that you joined us, and just wanted to take a moment to connect with you all as we navigate what's to come.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Kay. Always a pleasure.
Likewise. And in terms of follow-up, we will, for those of you who are subscribed to our newsletter, those who aren't, we encourage you to go to www.equityinthecenter.org and sign up. We will be including a list of resources for folks to utilize to learn more about like legal implications and other implications around the executive orders and the potential legislation coming this year. So thank you all for joining us. We wish you joy.